Go. Good evening. Welcome, lovelies and gems, to Season 1, Episode 6 of the Nightcap News. Sorry we're late tonight. I'm late tonight. I'm perpetually late, actually. But tonight I hit the wrong button and couldn't figure out why my webcam wouldn't turn on. So that was fun and interesting. And I haven't got it set up in the right spot. And super fun. Okay. Tonight's episode is The Trial Never Ends. And some of you may recognize that as yet another reference to my very favorite show of all time, Star Trek. Something that Q says to Picard. And actually, if tonight goes the way I expect it to, we're going to be covering a lot of Star Trek quotes and the reason for them. So first, I do want to cover some headlines. I'm not sure that these are in particular order of importance. Oh, actually, no. First, I would like you to take note of the Black Lives Matter flag behind me. That isn't there so that I can, what's that thing they call it? Virtue signaling. That's not there for virtue signaling, okay? And we're going to cover a story that I found out this week, I think 2 or 3 days ago, and it just appalls me. Behind me is also a chalkboard, blue writing you won't be able to read. I should learn to write that backwards so you guys can read it. But since you can't, it says, "No being is so important that he can usurp the rights of another." And that is a quote from the great Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Of course, it's actually a quote from some fantastic writer who worked for Star Trek The Next Generation. So whoever wrote that, my hat's off to you. Thank you. So with that, I want to cover the story that I feel is most important first. And this story has to do with a man named Amir Locke. Amir Locke, it was a 20-something black man. And he was asleep on his couch, and police in Minneapolis, Minnesota, while serving a no-knock warrant, broke into this house. They say there was 10 seconds, but for Amir there wasn't 10 seconds. For Amir there was not a full 3 seconds. I don't think. I saw the video several times. They broke into this house, and they're screaming, "Police, we have a warrant, we have a warrant." They are, but what you really hear is men shouting. And this guy from underneath the covers, he's buried under a blanket, starts to come up. He's been asleep on the couch. He has a gun in his hand when he comes up. I don't know why he was sleeping with a gun. It doesn't matter because it turns out he was the legal registered gun owner for that gun. So it doesn't matter why he was sleeping with a gun. He had the right to sleep with that gun. Okay? And he didn't get around to pointing it or aiming it or even dropping it or any of that. He didn't have time to say, "Hey, what's going on here?" Because the police just started firing. And they shot him. And he died at the hospital just a little while later. We say that all the amendments count. We've had conservatives up there this week. I think, it was Lauren Boebert tweeted just the most insane thing. She said something to the effect of, the Constitution shouldn't be changed. It's not, that's what she said. It's not evolving. To say otherwise is to spit in the face of the founders. Well, she's wrong. The Constitution has been evolving from day one. It's actually in the Constitution. Hey, this document's supposed to be updated to serve the needs and the times of the people. And one of the first 10 amendments, which are the amendments that we call the Bill of Rights, is the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. And what it was not clear to me from the way this story was reported was whether or not the man who got shot was in his own home or in someone else's. Either way, he was the legally registered gun owner. And the warrant was not for the man who was killed. It had nothing to do with him. He's not connected to the case that brought the police in the first place. They just broke down a door ready to shoot the first thing that moved. Some people are going to say, well, it's terrible that he was a black guy with a gun. In this particular case, I'm not even sure that the color of the man's skin had a lot to do with it. It'll have a lot to do with the way the police try to get out of taking any kind of responsibility for it. They've already released a statement that says, we're doing an investigation to see if in any way this man, Amir Locke, was connected to the case. Wait, so now that they've shot a man who was legally allowed to own a firearm and killed him, now they're going to go back and see if they can connect him posthumously to the case that brought them through that door in the first place. This is literally a case of shooting first and asking questions later. So here's my question. Do black people have the right to the Second Amendment or don't they? Because I have a list of names of black men who had their hands on a firearm or were near a firearm, or in the case of John Crawford, happened to be carrying a BB gun, which was a product in a store that was being sold, and it wasn't even out of the package. He was just carrying the BB gun. And all these men were shot because they were black and had a firearm. Philandro Castile, John Crawford, Amir Locke. I know I'm forgetting somebody important. I made a list of that names earlier, and then actually the list, this is the sad thing, it goes on and on and on and on. The reason that the charges were dropped for Breonna Taylor's boyfriend was because the police couldn't reasonably prove that in the middle of a no-knock raid, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend could have been thinking anything other than he was being attacked in his own home. We've got white supremacists out here legitimately threatening to attack black families. Is that why Amir Locke had a gun with him that night? Does it matter? It does not. That is the fact. He had the legal right to be sleeping on that couch with that gun. Until the police come up with some kind of evidence, they can't say otherwise. The gun was legally registered to Amir Locke. He was exercising his rights, his basic rights as a human being. I'm not even talking about anything codified in law, but there's been a principle since forever and ever, that says a man has a legitimate right to defend themselves. And in the United States, those rights are further extended to even against the government. If you're white and we decide we like you today. Not for Amir Locke. His Second Amendment rights were violated. His Fourth Amendment rights were violated. His rights were violated. He's lost his life. And, the kicker. This was a no-knock raid. I must have mentioned that 3 or 4 times already, and the reason I keep bringing it up is because if you will remember, in Minneapolis, during the protests surrounding the killings of George Floyd, and in Kentucky, Breonna Taylor, Minneapolis said, we're not going to do no-knock raids anymore. That's a no-no. They gave a caveat, and it was a sensible caveat, hostage situations. Yeah, first of all, we don't actually use no-knock raids for hostage situations. We do sneak in and pounce on people in the middle of hostage situations, but that's not really a raid. That's not executing a search warrant. That's rescuing people from a situation in which their lives are clearly in imminent danger. Of course, we sneak up on the bad guys doing that. Hello? But Minneapolis said, we're not going to do these no-knock raids anymore. What they meant is we're not going to do these no-knock raids while the cameras are on, looking at us, while public attention is showing just how bad we are. Effectively, Black people don't have their Second Amendment rights being protected by the government, because at every turn, if a Black person has a gun, there is always an excuse for why the police get to murder first and never have to answer questions later. And I won't say never, because that is slowly but surely changing. The only reason it's changing is because we've got cameras everywhere, and people are tired of it. They're tired of seeing entire generations wiped out because law enforcement is more violent and criminal and empowered than the worst gangs we have in the country. And that's true. Police kill more people than gangs do. Gang violence is terrible. It's particularly terrible when it's codified with a badge and the state issues those guns. So, I'm not in the mood to call for calm. I'm not calling for anything else either. But I don't want to see cities burning. I don't want to see businesses damaged. I don't want to see people scared. I don't want to see violence. We don't need anything else that's going to be transmitting more COVID, which has just gotten, much, much more spreadable. It's not killing people at quite the rate that it was. That is good. Is it more transmissible? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And that means that in a way, it's going to wind up killing just as many people if we go out there and we do the big marches and so on and so forth. So that's something to be aware of. But on the other hand, the right wing would have you believe that we burned Minneapolis to the ground and defunded the police, and that it's just this lawless, horrible place now because George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. But here's the police still issuing no-knock raids and killing Black men. And the state's going to decide whether or not to bring criminal charges. From the perspective of Amir Locke, he didn't have a full 3 seconds to react to anything happening around him. He was shot. And when the police released the video, they said, oh, well, it's 10 seconds, except that the video starts with them unlocking the door. Yeah, it's 10 seconds from the time they unlocked the door and entered the apartment. It is not 10 seconds from the moment that Amir Locke raises his head to try to figure out what's going on while he's asleep on the couch and he's dead. Nowhere near 10 seconds passes for him. So, I don't know what more we need as a society to do to insist that Black lives really must matter. That he had a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And more importantly, he also had a Second Amendment right to sleep with a damn gun underneath him. And I wish he hadn't. I wish he didn't live in a world where he felt he had to sleep with a freaking gun. I don't know why he felt he had to sleep with a freaking gun, but I know he lives in a world where even that didn't save him. So it's not like the fear wasn't justified. That brings us to the next point, which is Black Votes Matter. I want to tell you another story about systemic Black injustice today. Not actually today. This story goes back for a minute, and I'm trying to find... this lady has a lovely name, and I'm trying to find it. Pamela Moses. Okay. So that brings us to the case of Pamela Moses and Black votes mattering, and also how the state, man, China's kind of got us a little bit dead to rights in the human rights abuses thing, and I'm going to explain why. There's a Black Lives Matter activist by the name of Pamela Moses. Pamela Moses had a felony conviction back in 2015. I don't know what that conviction was, but here's the crux of it. Pamela believed that she was off probation, and she's a Black Lives Matter activist. She believes Black voices need to be heard. Black representation needs to start at the local level. She's doing the thing, whatever else she'd done before, which, you know, we charge Black people with felonies on a regular basis. I'm not even sure if the felony was some particular criminal crime of hers, you know. I mean, they tell me somebody committed a felony. Well, frick, you bounce a check too high, and that's a felony. So, I you know, the way we throw that around, oh, they're a felon. We always have that sort of on par as if it was like, oh, that means that they were breaking into convenience stores and waving guns around. That's not necessarily at all what it means. But she had a felony back in 2015. Now, she believes, for a variety of reasons, I'm assuming because she probably wasn't still going to probation meetings, but she believes she's off of parole. And so she goes to try and run for mayor. All of a sudden, the election board is like, hey, you can't even register to vote because, you know, you've got a felony. And she says, well, no, I'm off probation. And they says, well, maybe not. So she goes to the probation office and she says, hey, shouldn't I have been off probation by now? I mean, here's the law and here's, you know. And the probation office looks at the paperwork and goes, oh, yeah, you're not supposed to still be on probation. They fill out a form that shows that she's not supposed to still be on probation. They give it to her. She takes it to the election board. The election board files that piece of paper. She's no longer on probation as far as she knows. The very next day, the day after, she is charged with another felony, this time for attempting to register to vote when she's not supposed to. She goes to court, and I have no idea what is with either the prosecutor or the judge in this case. I really don't. But they weave this tale to make it look like she attempted to trick the probation, not that she did attempt to trick it. They said straight up that she tricked the probation board into signing off on this paperwork. I don't know how many of you guys have ever been on probation. I have never been on probation, but I do have some friends who have. And you can't just trick the probation board into reviewing your file, making up new laws, and filling out the paperwork willy-nilly based on no guidelines whatsoever. There is nothing she could possibly have said or done to do that. That's not how the process works at any step. That's not how the process works. So She gets charged with this. The judge essentially believes the prosecutor's story that this was deliberate, malicious attempt to register to vote when she knew she should not. And there is actually not a shred of evidence to support that. The evidence shows she believed she had a right to vote in the first place. When it was first denied, she went, "Oh, let me go fix it." And then she went and she tried to fix it. So she's going every step of the way with what the state is telling her. And then the state goes, "Oh, no, sorry, we were wrong. We made a mistake. It turns out you are still on probation. And now you're going to be charged again." And she was not only charged, but she was tried and convicted. And this is where it gets super egregious. The conviction landed her with a sentencing of 6 years in prison. Now, just in case you're wondering what actual voter fraud gets in terms of penalties, we had such a thorough voter fraud election, this last election, that we've got a pretty good idea who was committing that fraud and why. Back in 2016, one of the very few cases of voter fraud that was legitimately discovered was a woman from Kentucky who believed her vote would not be counted, and so she tried to vote twice. The court basically acted like she was so confused and like her terror had been so overwhelming that it had overridden her sense of judgment. And they gave her a slap on the wrist, I think, of probation, said, "Don't ever do that again," and sent her on her way. She didn't go to prison for that. Several Republican men, filled out ballots in the names of dead relatives, a wife, a mother, a father. Which, I mean, seriously? Seriously? The right wing cares so much about family values. None of them considered that to be in any kind of way desecration or disrespectful to their deceased loved ones. But okay. So apparently they can get past the moral quandary there. And they actually did this. And you know what they were sentenced to? Probation, with one exception. One guy was actually sentenced to some jail time. Just a ton of jail time. It was 3 whole days. 3 whole days. Now, these are people who actually registered to vote and then cast multiple ballots in that election, one for themselves and one for a deceased loved one. They got probation. This lady, she didn't get as far as voting. She didn't get as far as registering to vote. Now, mind you, she only discovered that this was a problem in the first place because she tried to run for mayor. During her sentencing, nobody told her that she was off the voter rolls. During her original 2015 sentencing, nobody told her that. She believed that once her probation was done, her voting rights would be restored. Nobody said otherwise to her. She never cast the actual ballot. She did not illegally vote. All she attempted to do was register to vote. And for that, she gets 6 years. That's a gross miscarriage of justice. I'm sure by now the ACLU is all over this like white on rice. And if they're not, by goodness, they should be. Really. There's no way when I look at this woman's history to ignore the distinct possibility that she was targeted not just because she was Black, but because she was an activist. She was a Black Lives Matter activist leader. And she was out there trying to make a difference. And we will apparently, the great state of Tennessee, will do anything to prevent Black leaders from having voice and representation, so much so that they would rather silence her and throw her in prison for 6 years than to recognize the basic right of every American to vote. So that's point two. It's not just that Black lives have to matter. They do matter and they must matter. It's also that Black votes must matter. And we know that Black votes matter because there are forces working so hard, so directly. Like these aren't even feints. This isn't the same game they used to play where they would pass sort of a sweeping law and then be like, oh no, I mean, this could affect everybody. So, it's not just Black people. No. They are targeting Black people and they know they're targeting Black people. Okay, that's in their own paperwork. I don't know if you guys remember that story. I think it's also from 2016. When they were drawing up redistricting maps, they straight up said, we're doing this because we need fewer Black voters in the electorate. It's targeted. So yeah, this was actually, I don't know if any of you guys noticed, but this was kind of a tough week for news for a pretty American reason. The news got super boring this week. I mean, I don't know about you, but I am tired of January 6th hearings. I'm tired of the whole thing. Americans get bored with this. Now, I want to caution you guys about that because that is exactly how the mice come out to play in this country. They are waiting for you to get bored and tune out. So I keep the I keep the January 6th hearings going on my YouTube sometimes. Just like, I'll just type it in and let it play for January 6th hearing stuff. Because it's very important that as much of that trial as can be public is public. It's important that the whole world knows that the whole country is watching those hearings and the outcome. We can't afford to tune that out. These people executed a coordinated, well-planned, well-thought-out, multi-pronged, multifaceted attack on the country. And the culmination of that may have looked like January 6th, but first, I highly doubt that's the ultimate culmination. We actually have an election coming up. We're going to see more. That was the opening. That was just the opening. Shots fired. That's all that was. Okay. This battle is a long way from over. But yeah, they're waiting for you to tune out of that. They're waiting for it to go away. If interest continues, then they'll have to, maybe hold some of those people to accountability. But at this point, we're already watching the bread and circuses play as bread and circuses. Donald Trump Jr. Sat there and pled the fifth for 5 to 8 hours. He gets to walk around making ridiculous assumptions, assertions, and claims, mostly about the Bidens. I don't know why he thinks that attacking the Bidens somehow does anything for him. I don't know how he thinks that's politically savvy. I don't understand what he thinks he's going to get out of destroying the opposition when right now he should be focusing all of his attention on saving his own bacon and trying to prove that he's not just the most contemptible, kind of person to have ever held a White House, familial position. I think he was the one who didn't have a position because Like, literally, he's not even trusted that well in his own family. So we're watching that, except that I'm not watching it because, when somebody bothers, like this week, we got testimony from Kelly McEnany. Is that her name? McEnany? Anyway, so we got testimony from her. Unlike Donald Trump Jr., we know that she didn't spend the entire several hours pleading the fifth over and over and over again. She cooperated at least to some extent. This is good. But there's a reason in federal courts, cameras aren't allowed. People are like, well, why were cameras allowed during George Floyd, but not these other hearings? Well, because it doesn't work that way exactly. The hearings themselves, I think, are being televised, but we don't necessarily get all of the testimony, because it takes all day and we'd be doing nothing else. So I'm not hearing. I don't seem to find the direct videos of the testimony, and I'm assuming that's because they're just not being released or at all. So at least, we didn't get hours and hours of pleading the fifth out of her, like we did out of Alex Jones. But I don't know. I'm kind of unbelievably bored with it, and I don't think I'm the only one. And every time I turned on the news, it was January 6th, January 6th, January 6th, and I'm like, oh my goodness, is anything else going on in the world? Well, that brings us to the two big international stories this week. There's continuing buildup on the Russian-Ukrainian border. The United States is now sending in some support. I believe the UN is considering or is sending in some support. And it's a whole great big mess with kind of wickedly deep and kind of convoluted political roots. So I looked up the history of this, of Ukraine and of Russia, and I looked it up going all the way back to the 9th century. And it's a complicated place in geopolitical history. What's, as far as Russia and Ukraine's relationship with each other. Okay. It's lengthy and it's convoluted and it goes back a long time. And even fairly recently, like, it's just kind of always been convoluted. But here's what isn't convoluted. That Russia came in what was that, 2014, and annexed Crimea, and is now clearly preparing to do something on the Ukrainian border. Russia believes, and some of their officials have come out and just made very clear statements about this, they basically believe that Ukraine is not legitimately its own country. They believe that it belongs to Russia, the same way that China believes Tibet belongs to China. Now, Tibet may have a different opinion, but as far as China is concerned, Tibet has always belonged to them and does belong to them, and they're just going to hold it under their unified China. Well, Russia feels the same way about Ukraine. And they've got this border buildup going on, and they're saying, oh, well, we have to protect our borders from Ukrainian aggression. And I'm kind of thinking, how aggressive was Ukraine being? So I might look to see if Ukraine was legitimately doing something that might have caused Russia to get that nervous, but I don't think so. I think this is Putin being ambitious. Okay, if I've ever seen a modern version of an old world prince walking around, in today's modern society, it would have to be Putin. He's just, it's almost admirable, from the place where, you're like, oh yeah, that's the sexy villain. Putin's kind of like the sexy villain of modern geopolitical climate. because he just walks around like he's absolutely entitled to everything that he sets his eyes on. He's like, you see where the light touches? All of this is my land. And it is my land because I said so. And I'm Putin and I've been in power forever. And I used to run the KGB. And you don't have a lot of power over me. And who's going to stop me? And the United States isn't going to stop him. Okay, not really. For one, we're in a lot of trouble with our own people about being the world police. For two, we kind of don't actually have the money for another protracted, lengthy military campaign in Russia in the winter. And can we just have a little historical context for how well that's gone for all of our predecessors who tried it? Yeah. Words wise, don't get in a land battle in Russia in the winter. It's been tried. It didn't even work for Hitler, and he had one of the most effective war machines the world has ever seen. So we could skip that. But I wanna tell you a little bit about where this story becomes personal to me. But I'm going to do that with a quote from Star Trek. This was said by Commander William T. Riker. He's speaking to Data. And he said, maybe if we felt any loss as keenly as we felt the death of one close to us, human history would be a lot less bloody. When Putin attacked in 2014, at the time, I actually had a super cush job. And I've mentioned this job before. I was briefly a property manager of an entirely doomed apartment complex. And the nice thing about being an on-site property manager is that, honestly, unless it's rent day or some pipe is burst, there's not necessarily a lot to do. I got paid to, sit around the living room playing video games. And that's exactly what I did for most of that year. I was playing Star Trek Online and I was super, super into it. Star Trek Online has one global server, so you're playing with people from all over the world. And I started my own fleet, which is like a guild. For those of you who have not played the game, a fleet would be like starting your own guild. And so I started one, and I went really out of my way to make this what I thought was very comprehensive ranking and system and for my fleet, and came up with symbols and patches, and I was having a lot of fun with that. And in the process of that, I got the attention of this guy. I'm gonna call him Pietro. That's not his name. I'm changing his name because I don't know his position or condition, and I would never do anything to endanger this lovely human being. So he is also on Star Trek Online. He joins my fleet, and he starts educating me about ranking systems around the world and in history, and he just knows so much about it. I grew up in the Air Force. Collecting Air Force patches was a thing my little sister and I always did with my daddy. So I had just an absolute, ball. I was having a ball with this guy teaching me about Russian patches and Russian military ranks and all kinds of neat stuff. And like the differences between Russian or Ukrainian ranks versus those of England and France. And he was in my fleet. He was, I did have a different number one. I did have a different first officer. He was actually, my first officer was a U.S. Air Force guy who I also lost track of right around the same time. Sad to say. But the Ukrainian guy was like my second in command. He helped me run the entire fleet. And then one day I woke up to the news that Russia had attacked. And I ran out to the living room and I logged onto the computer and Pietro had not logged in, and I never got to play with Pietro again. Star Trek Online brought us close together, and then war made it so that I was never able to play that game with my friend again. And I hate to report, but just a few months after that, I just completely lost interest in Star Trek Online altogether, having nothing to do with Star Trek Online. It is an amazing game. I highly recommend it if you're into MMORPGs. It is a lot of fun. It's maybe not the best in terms of the combat system and graphics and all that, but it's so much fun to play. It doesn't matter. Don't spend all your money on the crates, okay? But it is a lot of fun, and I highly recommend it. But for me, it kind of became instantly wrapped up in sadness and fear, which I felt every single time I turned it on and waited for Pietro to log on, which he never did again. I emailed him because we'd been exchanging patches and stuff. I'd given him my email, and he was sending me neat files with all kinds of cool patches from around the world. And so I had his email address, and I emailed him a couple of times. I wasn't expecting to hear back from him necessarily over the course of our friendship. He told me he held what was basically the Ukrainian equivalent of PhDs. He held 2 PhDs, and I guess at least one of them was in metallurgy, which was super cool. I can't remember what the other one was. But I realized when the first attack happened that he was kind of like a priority target. Like, even if the Russians got their hands on this guy, they weren't going to kill him right away. He was a very valuable, very educated man. So they put people like that in dark holes somewhere and make them run, algorithms and do strategic planning and all kinds. I mean, they're going to find a guy like that useful. And sure enough, just a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I very, very randomly got an email from him, and it was in response to the emails that I had sent years and years before, basically saying, hey, thank you for caring. Yes, me and my family are safe. Yes, you're right. Ukraine didn't waste any time. They got us somewhere safe. They got us out of the way. And so I'm very glad for that. Unless COVID's gotten him in the interim, or maybe old age or something else I didn't foresee, he's still kicking it somewhere in the Ukraine, and I'm very grateful. But as this buildup happened, I raced back there in my mind instantly. I mean, all over again, it's 2014 for me. All over again, I'm thinking to myself, my God, would you people stop? Biden, stop. Would the ambassadors please stop? Would Putin please stop? You guys are going to hurt people who didn't do shit to you. People who would be happy living out the rest of their days, paying your damn taxes and playing Star Trek Online. That's who you're hurting. That's who you're going to hurt with your silly imperialistic war games. Is Putin going to get hurt? Nope. Is Biden going to get hurt? Nope. Is anyone in their families going to get hurt? Nope. Will my friend Pietro get hurt? Will some girl in Ukraine just like me get hurt? In fact, there's a well-known Final Fantasy streamer who put out a video also this week. And I guess she's trying to leave Ukraine. She's an American citizen. I don't know what brings her to Ukraine. University or something would be my guess. But anyway, she's been living there, and she's a very, very popular Final Fantasy streamer. And so this is affecting, this kind of thing doesn't affect the lives of the rich and powerful people who have something to gain or lose out of playing this game. I'm not talking about Final Fantasy. I'm talking about the geopolitical game. But it affects people who have no harm in their heart, who just want to live their lives, eat their lunch, and pay your damn taxes. So I don't understand why we war. I don't think I'm ever going to understand why, if I get mad at somebody and I'm like, hey, you took my backpack or whatever, or you have this idea that I don't like, right? Like if I just up and decide tomorrow, oh, you know what? I hate National Socialists. I hate Nazis. Nazis don't deserve to live. I'm going to go out and I'm going to shoot every single Nazi I find. If I were to say something horrible like that and then I tried to do it, I'd be charged with a crime. Like a whole slew of them. Okay, I'm not coming out of a deep dark hole for a long, long time. But if a bunch of powerful people with a lot of money say, we're going to set things up so that not just some people get killed, but like we're going to gather up a bunch of people to go do these sprees like all together, like really organized, and we'll be super efficient about our killing. Oh, well, that's not a crime. That's fine. That's just fine, right? Or no, maybe warmongers should go to prison. Like every other murderer has to go to prison. I don't know. So yeah, we've got that buildup going on, and that brings us to the other big piece of international news. It's a little bit more positive, maybe, and that's China. So I did watch the opening games in Beijing last night. Not that I was in Beijing, but the opening games were in Beijing. Watched the opening games, and the messaging. I don't know if anybody else caught on to this, but the messaging was 1,000 miles away from where the messaging was in the 2008 Summer Games. So, or was it 2018? I think it's 2018. Oh my goodness. I'm not doing names and dates tonight, am I? So, in the previous Summer Olympics, China's opening show was definitely a display of their people power. If they were saying anything with that first display, it was, look, we can marshal 1 billion people to march in exact lockstep based on a timer you can't see to perfection. What you got? Everything about that previous Summer Games opening show felt like a challenge. It felt like intimidation. It felt like, hey, just so you know, the Red Dragon's awake and we're watching you. And look what we can do. And I really was, I felt like there was an inherent warning in that opening games. It just felt aggressive. Well, the opening games last night were literally snowflakes, and the theme was basically stronger, better, faster, together. Unity was the absolute forefront of this show, including one of their torchbearers being a member of the Uyghur minority. Now that is, for those of you who may not know, that is a cultural group, a cultural minority within China and the United States and others internationally. Okay, so this is not one of those things that the United States is just making stuff up out of the blue completely. But our position is that China, communist China, the Chinese Communist Party, is committing cultural genocide against the Uyghur people. China emphatically denies this, and I don't live in China. I have not done the research. I haven't even read what's been written by the people who did do the research. So I am not going to attempt to comment one way or another about whether or not China is actually doing this. I believe that China commits horrendous human rights violations. But China had this person, I think, in such an important position, literally helping to carry the torch, not just to show unity, but also maybe kind of as a, hey, pot calling the kettle over here, because the United States decided, yes, we'll send our athletes. We're fine competing in the games. We want the medals. We love the medals, right? We're not going to send our ambassadors because China commits human rights abuses. China is committing cultural genocide. And I'm over here thinking like, and the United States let the Navajo Nation suffer during COVID horrendously. The United States has been committing cultural genocide this entire time. There's approximately 5 to 6 million, they estimate, Native Americans on the North American continent. We are outnumbered by people of Asian ethnicity by several million. African Americans are, what was it, 70 million or 77 million? With the bulk of the country still being, it is still majority white. There's no ethnic group. There's no race with fewer number of people on the North American continent than the indigenous people of the North American continent. So maybe the U.S. shouldn't be standing on some pretend high horse and acting like it does not absolutely cover up missing indigenous women week after week, month after month, year after year. It can't sit there and scream human rights abuses at China when I opened this show tonight with the story of Amir Locke. His human rights were abused. And yes, it's entirely possible that China used the games to do their own version of the token diversity person. Okay? I'm not saying they didn't do that. Okay? I don't know whether they did that or not, but I mean, would it surprise me? No. China's all about face, right? But the United States can't sit here on some pretend ethical and moral high ground and act like we're not. We literally came up with the phrase token because we're so good at keeping face, So that's the international news. The trial never ends. The great American experiment goes on. In case you're wondering where I skipped to that from. So back to domestic news. As you guys have now, I'm sure, heard, Justice Breyer is going to be retiring from the Supreme Court. And if you're like, wait a minute, I thought the Supreme Court was for life. It is. It's for life or until retirement. So why is Breyer retiring? My guess is, first of all, he is getting older. Maybe he just wants to spend some time with his family. He's been doing the law thing all his life. Maybe he'd like to go home and spend some time with the grandbabies. Just a thought. But there's probably a much more likely political reason why he's retiring right now. If he retires right now, there is no chance that he dies before the next election cycle. Um, so in other words, he is ensuring that Biden gets the next nomination for a Supreme Court justice while Democrats still have effective control of the House and Senate. Boom. Because yes, the right wing absolutely stacks the Supreme Court. It's almost like the right wing does things or says that the left wing is doing things that they either know that they are about to do or are actively doing. They just, for the mere suggestion that we increase the number of justices on the Supreme Court to 13 to make it harder for either side to stack the court, the right wing has been accusing the left wing of attempting to stack the Supreme Court for months. Ted Cruz, not that anybody should be listening to what falls out of that man's mouth, because I don't even think he knows what's going on his own side of the aisle most of the time. But if you were listening to Ted Cruz, he made the argument repeatedly that it was the left making an attempt to stack the Supreme Court in our favor. But the Supreme Court did actually get stacked in a partisan favor, and that was for Republicans. Donald Trump got 3 judicial nominees. He was a one-term president. He got 3 judicial nominees. But sure, the left wing stacking the court. Okay, we'll go with that, I guess. So when Justice Breyer kind of gave his retirement speech, he said something. Well, he said a lot of beautiful things. I mean, honestly, if you haven't gone and YouTubed that speech yet, if you don't know what he said, just do yourself a favor and Google that, YouTube that. It's all over there. Just type in Justice Breyer, America is an experiment, and you're going to get to hear a truly wonderful speech from a guy who doesn't sound like he's giving a speech. He sounds like he's just talking to people, which I love it when they can do that. He was talking about the American experiment and how it's how it's gone on this whole time, and it's going to keep going, and we get to choose. Us, you and me, we get to choose about this experiment, this great human experiment. What will we choose? We spend all our time talking about history, and we can't erase history. We can't obfuscate history. We must not shy away from history, no matter how uncomfortable or icky it makes us. The very fact that it makes us uncomfortable is exactly why we need to be rubbing our own noses in the funky spot. Because it's the funky spot, and we're trying to avoid that, right? But we can also, and we must also, be looking towards the future. What does the United States of tomorrow look like? Where is this great experiment in democracy and in rule of law? Where's it going? Where's it going? Where are we trying to go? And I think there was a couple of times when we've had a really clear sense of national purpose. Post 9/11, clear sense of national purpose, right? We were however briefly, united in being hurt and angry and sad and horrified. We split almost immediately on what to do about that, but for a brief moment, we had a national purpose. COVID did not bring us a national purpose. As it turns out, in the current political climate, there is no external crisis that could come on Americans right now that would somehow magically knit us together to be united in a national purpose. But we can choose to ask ourselves the question, as individuals, as parties, as community leaders, organizers, activists, what does tomorrow's United States look like? How can we do better? How do we stop committing genocide against what is left of the Native American people? How can we empower Native voices? How do we ensure that the human rights and the constitutional rights of Black people are protected, defended fiercely? The NRA wants to fiercely defend Second Amendment rights, unless the Black guy is asleep on his couch. Think Mr. Wayne Pierre is going to give any speeches about that? We can choose, though. We can choose. Got another quote from you guys here. This is, I don't know. Star Trek is so filled with all these amazing concepts and ideas. I hesitate to say anything is my favorite quote, but I will say this is probably my favorite Kirk quote, okay? Captain Kirk. Bit brash, not really my style. I'm more of a Captain Picard girl. Yeah, no, it's true. But, well, really, I'm a Riker girl. But Kirk said this incredibly important thing. And again, actually, big shout out to the writers, the script writers, that yeah, William Shatner delivered the line. The Captain Kirk character gave us the context. Some writer made the world a better place for writing these words. We're human beings with the blood of a million savage years on our hands, but we can stop it. We can admit that we're killers, but we're not going to kill today. That's all it takes. Knowing that we're not going to kill today. I have wondered many times what it would be like if for just 24 hours, not one single human being raised their hand to another single human being in violence. If we could take a pause for straight 24 hours, started at Greenwich Mean Time, straight 24 hours, not one human being harming another in any way. Could we suspend that moment? Could we hold our breath? How long could we hold our breath before we just had to hurt somebody again? Of course, we've never even made it 12 hours, much less 24, so I don't think I'm ever going to find the answer to that question. So let me see. Ooh, yeah, this one I'm a little bit hesitant to want to cover in a great deal of detail because I was so busy looking for news stories that I forgot that some of them I was going to have to go back over and get the who, what, when, where, why, how. But this is a kind of important story. In California, Shasta, California, a moderate Republican has been ousted from his seat. And the people have instead elected a militia a militia leader to that seat. Supposedly mostly over anger about mask mandates and just basically COVID response in Shasta. So that's great. As soon as we get scared and we don't like what the rule of law has to say, we're just going to go ahead and recall those guys. By the way, there was a billionaire funding the recall of that guy. So outside billionaires. Didn't so much trump the will of the people, I suppose. But, I mean, when the people have elected somebody and then somebody else is like, ooh, you know, we don't like this guy, so we're going to, all the way from another state. By the way, the billionaire who bankrolled the recall doesn't even live in California. He's a billionaire, I believe, in Colorado. So why does he care? But he got into the he got into the race and he heavily backed the challenger, who is this militia member, and now a new man guy, last name Zapato, is the new elected official because, a Colorado billionaire and this militia member decided that being a rational, moderate Republican was just giving in to left-wing authoritarianism or whatever horrendous story they came up to tell themselves in order to feel better about the fact that they are infiltrating our public offices. Law enforcement noticed and warned, although they did not take. It's funny. Law enforcement warned law enforcement that law enforcement was being infiltrated by white supremacists, but white supremacists and law enforcement didn't take the reports seriously, and so more white supremacists, infiltrated law enforcement. And that's the history of American law enforcement today. That's not yesterday's history. I'm not talking about the 1960s. I'm not talking about the 70s, the 80s, and 90s. I am talking about right now, today. That is our current history. In other words, our present. I feel like a lot of the rest of this, I very much want to cover at another time. I took so many notes, and I wasn't really sure where I was going with this tonight. I really didn't. So I'm actually going to leave off with, because I also just checked the time. We're running a little bit over also. But I also actually want to turn your attention to one more story this week that you may or may not have seen. Nazis. Nazis are here. They're demonstrating. In case you missed their Lincoln Memorial March, where they didn't actually have Nazi symbolism marching with them, but they kind of very clearly, they took that on. Like they took on the whole idea of it. And it was pretty obvious on that one. But this time they showed up in two places, and they showed up with swastikas and flags, Orlando, Florida, and then there was also an overpass in Texas that they took over. Now, I don't know all the details of how Texas is handling it. The state troopers broke up the overpass protest. Not because they were flying hate speech off a bridge, but just because, as it turns out, it is illegal to hang any kind of sign off of a bridge right there in Texas. So the troopers had a blanket reason to go in there and disrupt that group. But in Orlando, Florida, a crowd gathered on it looked like the sidewalk and grass area near the front of a shopping mall area. I saw the video, and it looks like they're on the sidewalk. They didn't appear, for the most part, to be impeding traffic. So I heard a lot of people say, well, why were the police allowing all of this? Well, because the police have absolutely no problems whatsoever respecting the human and constitutional rights of white supremacists. Okay? They don't feel like they have to respect the constitutional rights of a black man who has a gun in his possession, no matter how legal that gun might be. But white supremacists flying Nazi flags and screaming things at people they perceive as Jewish, like, oh, you know where you're going back to, which was something that, yes, actually one of them said to a person. I do not know if the person in the car was Jewish, but the people on the sidewalk perceived that person as Jewish and then proceeded to say horrendous, threatening, awful, awful things. One of the things that was said was, oh, you know where you're going back to. That is a threat. That is hate speech. Okay? I don't care how cleverly he thinks he had it couched in order to fall under the guidelines of what he thinks the First Amendment covers, but that's hate speech. Those people were allowed to stand there without police interference. If that had been a bunch of Black Panthers there waving their Black Lives Matter flag, police would have shown up. Okay? They would have shown up. Now, they might have shown up and stood respectfully and politely across the street and said, hey, we're just here to keep the peace and keep calm and so on and so forth. They might have done that. But they would have been there They probably would have been in there in some force, and they probably would have been facing in such a way not to protect the demonstrators, but to intimidate the demonstrators. But because these were neo Nazis, if there were even police like there on the scene doing any of that, it's not shown in the video, it's not talked about. Apparently, these people were allowed to stand for hours harassing Americans, harassing their fellow Americans, spewing vile hatred. And I it's funny because at the exact moment that that was happening, I was in a Facebook argument with somebody who was telling me that I was engaging in hyperbole about Nazis and that I needed to stop calling everybody who disagreed with me Nazis, and went on to further claim that, oh, well, they weren't, there were no real Nazis actually really out there threatening Jews. And I was like, well, at the time I hadn't seen these videos yet. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure there are. I'm pretty sure in dark, quiet corners and closets and bar rooms that you and I would not walk into because we're civilized folk. Yeah, they're doing exactly that. Turns out they're not being closeted. They're pretty, man, Americans, loud and proud. Okay, they're exercising their First Amendment right to free speech just fine, right? So I actually found the videos somewhat ironically like 10 minutes after that conversation, or well, I thought that conversation was over, and I shared it with this guy. I never got a response on that, but at the same time, I also shared it with a right-wing friend of mine. And I said, hey, what's your justification for this crap? You know, because this friend of mine says, oh, I'm not racist. It's not really about race. It's about love of country. It's about this. It's about that. No, man. It's about racism. So I sent him this video in order to be like, look, this is clearly about racism. Okay, not economics, not any of the other things you're saying. This is not about love of country. This is racism, pure and simple. And he says to me straight up, how do we actually know they're Nazis? I'll bet those are all just FBI plants. When I saw this story covered, when I initially saw it covered on Rachel Maddow, I saw it covered again, I think later that evening or maybe the next day, also by TYT. Okay. And when I saw the issue covered by TYT, they put up a graphic of a tweet that was in response to this Orlando, Florida Nazi gathering. And in the tweet, this person is saying, how do we even know that they were really Nazis? So I've noticed this, and this really disturbs me. Something that the right wing has gotten their followers. I think the leaders probably know better, but the followers are falling for this again and again. It isn't the first time where I've come up with like solid, you can't deny this. This is like in your face truth. There's no getting around it. This is what this side did. This is what they said. Here, look at them being loud and proud. They're in uniform. They've got their swastikas or their Confederate flag or whatever. And this is what they're saying. And they go, oh, well, how do we know that's not really Antifa in disguise? How do we know that's not an FBI plant? So, like, this level of denialism bothers me because it's just a way for people who kind of want to believe in these things. It's the story that they're having to tell themselves because they can't face that level of racism. Then they'd have to look at this and say, oh my goodness, I really have allied myself with a group of people who hate for the sake of hating. This has nothing to do with love of country. This has nothing to do with love of my own heritage. This has nothing to do with any of the rest of that stuff. This is, at the end of the day, about hate, pure and simple. And since people can't say that to themselves, since they can't admit that they were on the side of hate, now we're hearing this, and we're going to hear a lot more of it. We heard it in regards to January 6th already. Now we're going to hear it about this Orlando, Florida demonstration. Well, how do you know that it was Nazis? Well, I'll tell you how we know it's Nazis, my friends. It's very simple. If it waddles like a duck and quacks like a duck and has feathers like a duck, it's a duck. These people are out there screaming insults at Jews, proudly wearing their swastikas and calling themselves the National Socialists of America. My friends, believe them. They're very proud. They want you to see them. They want you to know that they are here. Now, they do want you to be intimidated by that. I don't recommend that part. Laugh at them, scorn them, mock them, belittle them, disgrace them, emasculate them, shame them. But don't pretend that they're not here. Don't give them the power to wheedle out of it and go, oh, well, maybe it was Antifa in disguise. My friends, Antifa can barely organize a ham sandwich, I promise you. Infighting in the left would prevent us from coming up with anything nearly that clever. Not to mention, we've never managed to execute it. Okay, I promise you. Most Antifa members would puke before the words could even come out of it. They wouldn't even be able to demonstrate this effectively or convincingly. Like, I promise you, if Antifa were out there doing this, you would know it was Antifa, okay? Nope. These are Nazis. And they want you to know that they're Nazis. And they want you to know that they're here. They want you to feel threatened and intimidated by their presence. And they don't want you to forget that they now feel like there's enough of them and that they are emboldened enough that they don't have to wear the damn masks. They don't have to wear the damned hoods. They can just say, hey, look, we're Nazis in America. We got free speech too. How do you like that? So next week, we're probably going to do a show on the conundrum of tolerating intolerance and how you absolutely cannot tolerate intolerance. We're also probably going to talk a little bit about the elite, and how the left wing probably should stop using that phrase and why. And we're also probably going to spend some time talking about purity policing at some point in the next couple of weeks, because the right wing, while it's trying to create a sort of a homogenous group of people, and it doesn't see the danger, for example, my right-wing friend knows that I am part Native American. He's very well aware of this. Now, he doesn't actually believe that other Nazis are really racists. For some reason in his head, it's stuck. It's got nothing to do with race. This is all about, for him, it's all about fighting the libs and fighting the corporations, and he has this all very, very, very mixed up, and he doesn't want to accept the race element in it because, unfortunately, he's very misguided this way. So he knows that I'm Native, and he thinks that, where was I going with that? Fortunately, I had a note on this somewhere. Or I didn't. Yeah, it's getting late. I should probably let you all go and hope you have a wonderful weekend. But no, we can't. Don't let Nazis get away with going, oh, well, maybe it wasn't really Nazis, because they're Nazis, okay? They're Nazis. They're loud. They're proud. They're trying to be famous. They want you to know. They want you to be scared. Don't be scared. Laugh at them. My God, laugh at them. Take a page out of Mel Brooks' book, okay? If you want to know how to make fun of Nazis, as luck would have it, Mel Brooks has already written us a script to follow. So we can, dress up like men in tights and start trolling them at their rallies. I don't know. Do something. Don't do what the mainstream media news is about to do, which is to take them so seriously that they continue to instill fear. You know how you get rid of Nazis? You make them look freaking ridiculous. You make them look as stupid as they are. These people are master race of nothing and no one. Brings me to my final Star Trek quote for the night before I let you all go. I suppose I probably should have ended maybe on the Tao, which is the only true mastery is self-mastery or something along those lines. Not going to do that. So, this is from Mr. Spock. One man cannot summon the future, but one man can change the present. So go out there, be that man today, change the present. A species that enslaves other beings is hardly superior, mentally or otherwise. Jean-Luc Picard. Absolutely. And time is the fire in which we all burn, which was brilliantly said by actor Malcolm McDowell in the Star Trek Generations. So that's our show for tonight, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much again, as always, for being here. Sorry I didn't get to anybody's comments. I had my notes up, and it occurs to me I have the notes up over the comment section, so I haven't read a single one. I do want to give a shout out to a couple of people I actually forgot to shout out to the last couple of weeks. So first of all, to my friend Jordan, who gave me the very cool t-shirt I wore a couple of weeks ago. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was so sweet and just, you absolutely nailed it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. To my friends, Peter, Katie, John, Fred, Wade, oh, I'm forgetting so many of you. I mean, seriously, I've forgotten none of you. Jasmine, Keto, just those of you who have even just tuned in after the fact or catch bitsies of my show every now and again when you can. Everything you guys do is so much appreciated. So thank you all for being here. I will see you next week. And as always, of course, live long and prosper. Good night.